You reached for your phone and realized you were no longer waiting for them to come back. That was new. For a long time, some part of you kept waiting. Waiting for the message. Waiting for the apology. Waiting for the moment they would understand what they had walked away from. Even after the conversation stopped, your mind kept the relationship alive. You replayed old interactions. You imagined what you would say if they returned. You wondered whether you had misunderstood everything. And then, quietly, something changed. The thought of them was still there, but the urgency was gone. You were no longer standing emotionally in the place where they left you. That was the first real sign. Not that they had changed. That you had. Chosen one. The people who left you will feel it later. Not because life punishes them. Not because you prove anything. But because the version of you they walked away from was only the beginning. And by the time they understand what they left behind, you will already be someone else. At first, their absence felt louder than anything they ever said. You noticed it in small moments. When something happened and your instinct was to tell them. When you reached for your phone before remembering they were no longer part of your life. When a familiar place brought back a version of you that still expected them to be there. These were ordinary moments. But they carried weight. Because loss is rarely experienced all at once. It shows up in routines. In reflexes. In the quiet assumptions your mind has not yet updated. Part of you kept acting as if the relationship still existed. As if one message could restore what had been lost. As if understanding the ending would somehow reverse it. And because of that, you stayed emotionally connected long after they had left. Not because you were weak. Because your mind was trying to protect you from a reality that had not fully settled in. You were not just missing them. You were adjusting to a world that no longer worked the way you expected. That is why separation feels disorienting. The person is gone, but the internal pattern remains. And until that pattern changes, some part of you keeps waiting. So you tried to make sense of it. You replayed conversations. You looked for the exact moment things shifted. You examined your words, your tone, your decisions. Maybe you said too much. Maybe you said too little. Maybe you should have seen it sooner. The mind does this when something important ends. It searches for a clean explanation. Because if there is a clear cause, there is the illusion of control. And if there is control, there is hope that the outcome could have been different. For a while, that hope can feel comforting. But it also keeps you tied to the past. You remain focused on what should have happened instead of what is happening now. And while you are analyzing every detail, another realization begins to form. The relationship did not end because of one conversation. It ended because something deeper was no longer working. The dynamic had been under strain for longer than you wanted to admit. You were carrying more than your share, adjusting more than you realized, explaining more than you should have had to, trying to preserve something that increasingly depended on your effort alone. That is when the confusion changes. You stop asking only why they left. You begin asking why you worked so hard to keep something alive that no longer felt honest. And that question changes everything. Most people think separation begins when someone walks away. In reality, it begins much earlier. It starts when your inner experience and your outward behavior stop matching. You say yes while your body tightens. You explain yourself even when you feel misunderstood. You accept patterns that leave you drained, hoping your patience will eventually create closeness. From the outside, this can look like loyalty. Internally, it often feels like tension. You sense that something is off, but you keep adapting. You become more understanding, more accommodating, more available. Not because it feels right, because losing the relationship feels more threatening than losing parts of yourself. These adaptations are rarely conscious. They are learned responses, ways of maintaining connection, ways of staying recognizable, ways of avoiding the discomfort of letting something change. Over time, these responses can feel like identity. You begin to believe that your role is to hold everything together, to smooth over conflict, to keep the relationship functioning even when it depends on constant effort. Then awareness interrupts the pattern. You notice how often you are anticipating their reactions, how quickly you explain yourself, how much of your energy is spent maintaining emotional stability. And once you see this clearly, the relationship feels different. The same conversations now carry a different weight. The same patterns no longer feel normal. The same compromises feel more costly. Nothing outside may have changed yet, but internally, the structure is already shifting. This is the beginning of separation. Not because love disappeared, because awareness made the imbalance impossible to ignore. That awareness creates pressure. Part of you still wants the familiar connection. Part of you can no longer pretend that familiar means healthy. This is the season where everything feels uncertain. You are not fully detached, but you can no longer participate unconsciously. Conversations feel heavier. Silences feel more revealing. The effort required to maintain the old dynamic becomes increasingly visible. And once the cost is visible, your behavior starts to change. You take longer to respond. You stop explaining every feeling. You become less willing to ignore what your body has been telling you. Other people notice the difference. They may not understand it. They only sense that your energy is changing. You are less reactive, less eager to repair everything immediately, less available to the patterns that once defined the relationship. This can be unsettling for them and for you, because every relationship develops an emotional structure, certain roles, certain expectations, certain predictable responses. When you stop playing your usual role, the structure is tested. Sometimes it adjusts. Sometimes it falls apart. If the relationship depended on your constant accommodation, your increased awareness creates pressure it cannot withstand. And what looked like abandonment is often the collapse of a dynamic that required you to keep abandoning yourself. That realization can be painful, but it is also clarifying. You are not watching a healthy connection disappear. You are watching an unsustainable pattern lose its grip. Eventually, the emptiness begins to organize itself. The silence becomes less threatening. The absence becomes easier to carry. And your attention shifts from what was lost to what is becoming possible. You begin to see how much energy was tied up in waiting. Waiting for them to understand. Waiting for them to change. Waiting for the relationship to become what you hoped it could be. When that waiting ends, something unexpected happens. Your energy returns. You think more clearly. Your body feels steadier. The constant internal negotiation begins to quiet down. You no longer need every relationship to survive in order to feel secure. You no longer interpret distance as proof that you are unworthy. You no longer confuse familiarity with alignment. This is where reorganization begins. Your standards become clearer. Your responses become more deliberate. Your sense of self becomes less dependent on how others choose to show up. Some relationships deepen. Others fade naturally. Not because you are pushing people away, because you are no longer carrying what does not belong to you. This can look like loss, but it feels increasingly like relief. The space they left behind is no longer a wound. It becomes room. Room to think. Room to breathe. room to build a life that does not require constant emotional compromise. And in that room, your identity begins to stabilize. Over time, the story changes. You stop defining the experience by who left. You define it by what became visible. You see the patterns more clearly. The ways you overextended. The ways you ignored your own signals. The ways you mistook endurance for connection. And you see what awareness made possible. More honesty. More steadiness. More trust in your own perception. You no longer need immediate answers. You no longer need closure to move forward. You no longer need someone else to validate what you already know. That is a profound shift. Because your center of gravity moves inward. You become less driven by fear of loss. More guided by what feels true. People notice the difference. There is less urgency in the way you speak. Less tension in the way you move. Less effort to secure a particular outcome. And one day, the people who left may see it too. Not as punishment. Not as revenge. But as recognition. They will sense the steadiness. The clarity. The quiet confidence that comes from no longer abandoning yourself. They will understand, perhaps too late, that they did not leave someone who was falling apart. They left someone who was becoming more whole. And by then, you will not need them to understand. Because the real transformation was never about being chosen by them. It was about finally choosing yourself. You thought their leaving meant you had lost something essential. In reality, it revealed what had been happening beneath the surface. How much you were carrying. How often you were adapting. How much of your energy was spent trying to preserve what no longer fit. The separation hurt because it exposed the pattern. But awareness changed your relationship to that pain. What first felt like abandonment became clarification. What first felt like emptiness became room. What first felt like rejection became alignment. The people who left may feel it later. They may recognize what you were becoming. They may understand what they walked away from. But that is no longer the point. The real change happened when you stopped waiting in the place where they left you. You became aware. You reorganized. You moved differently. And that changed everything. This is Obsidian Within. Forged in the shadows. Destined for more.